The laughter echoed across the garden, filling the air with an almost sickening warmth as the evening sun dipped low behind the mansion. It was the annual family gathering, the one event every year where our entire family came together, except for me. I stood there, a shadow among the bright smiles, watching as everyone else seemed to bask in the comfort of familiarity, while I felt like an outsider in my own life. "You were never really one of us," my stepmother, Victoria, declared from the far side of the garden. Her voice, always polished and poised, carried easily through the gathering, reaching my ears as if she'd meant for it to. Her words were sharp, laced with a venom she'd perfected over the years, like a venomous snake whose fangs she'd learned to hide behind her cold smile. She leaned against the stone railing of the balcony, one hand delicately holding her glass of wine, the other lightly brushing her perfectly styled hair back. Her designer dress shimmered in the twilight, her posture proud, as if she owned the world, or at least this family. I barely looked at her. It wasn't worth it. She said it like it was just a fact, a simple truth she'd been repeating for the last 2 decades. But it still stung. "You were just a mistake your father made," she added, turning away from me to focus on the conversation with the other guests, her tone dismissive. "My name is Elena Porter, and I was 34 when I stood there, in the middle of the very garden where I had once spent countless summers as a child. Only now, the place felt alien to me, as if I was walking through a scene I no longer belonged to. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. The string lights twinkled above, casting long shadows across the faces of my relatives. They were all too busy pretending to enjoy the evening, pretending this was normal, pretending I wasn't the anomaly that none of them knew how to deal with. Then came Sophia, my younger stepsister, cutting through the air with her dramatic flair. "Look at this," she said, holding up her phone for everyone to see, her voice loud enough for the entire garden to hear. "We've been updating the family photos." She clicked her phone screen, turning it so I could see it too. There it was. The picture from last Christmas, a moment frozen in time. A family gathered around the fireplace, smiling as if the world was perfect. But not my face. My face had been meticulously erased. The background blurred in a way that made it seem like I had never been part of the family at all. My presence erased, my absence declared. "We're fixing all of them," Lily, my other stepsister, added with a smile that barely concealed her pity. It wasn't a smile of kindness, though. No, it was a smile of triumph. A smile that said they'd won. "It's better this way, don't you think?" she continued, her voice dripping with fake empathy. "Better this way." I stared at the altered photo, feeling my grip on my wine glass tighten until I thought it might shatter. For 20 years, this family had smiled in front of cameras and celebrated each milestone, each holiday, each gathering with memories of a happy family. But behind that smile, I was a ghost who had been erased from photographs, from their lives, from their hearts. The irony wasn't lost on me. They weren't just making the photos match what they had been doing to me for years. This was about control. This was about power. They wanted to rewrite history, to make sure no one ever remembered that I was part of it. Part of their family. That I had ever mattered. My father, William, stood off to the side, his focus suddenly drawn to his shoes, his posture stiff. The same man who had negotiated billion-dollar real estate deals without so much as breaking a sweat couldn't seem to muster the courage to stand up for his own daughter. Not when it came to her mother's death. Not when it came to Patricia, his wife, erasing me from every part of his life that mattered. He didn't even look my way, not even once. Not even when they tore me apart in front of him. I glanced at him, but he didn't meet my eyes. His gaze remained on the ground, pretending as if I wasn't standing there, pretending as if everything had always been this way. "I think that's enough," my Aunt Clara finally spoke up from the corner of the garden, her voice just loud enough to cut through the growing tension. She tried to intervene, but the damage had already been done. The other guests, half of them extended family, the other half my father's colleagues, had already begun to whisper among themselves, their eyes flicking back and forth between me and Victoria like they were watching the final set of a tennis match. There was no sympathy in their eyes, no empathy. Just curiosity, like they couldn't wait to see what would happen next. I slowly brought the glass to my lips, taking a sip of wine as I felt my pulse quicken. The cold liquid was a temporary balm, a fleeting moment of calm before the storm. "You know what's funny, Victoria?" I asked, my voice steady, surprising even myself. Her eyes flicked toward me, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features as if she hadn't expected me to speak. "What's that, Elena?" she replied with that false sweetness, her grip tightening around her glass as if she were holding on to some semblance of control. "You've spent 20 years trying to erase me?" I continued, leaning in just slightly, making sure every word carried weight. "But here I am, still standing. Maybe the real mistake isn't who you think it is." Her face faltered just for a second. The Botox that kept her expression frozen for the most part twitched ever so slightly. Her smile dropped as she tried to mask the growing unease. "Is that a threat, Elena?" she snapped, her voice dropping a notch, colder than before. I shook my head, setting my nearly empty glass on the table beside me. "No," I said quietly, my eyes meeting hers. "Just an observation, and soon a fact." I turned and began walking away, my heels clicking sharply against the stone pathway leading away from the garden, my mind racing with the thoughts of everything I had just seen and heard. Behind me, I could hear Victoria's voice already spinning my departure into another example of my difficult personality and inability to accept reality. She would twist it, as always, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that the truth was out there now, and soon it would all be revealed. As I walked to my car, I stole one last glance back at the house. William was standing at the study window, his eyes watching me, just like the rest of them. For a moment our eyes met, and I saw it, a flicker of something. Was it guilt? Fear? But then, just as quickly, he turned away, the same way he had done every time something important had happened. Every time I had tried to reach out, and I thought back to how it all began. The day Victoria had entered our lives. The night after the family reunion, everything felt different. The sharp sting of Victoria's words still echoed in my ears, like an unhealed wound reopening with each passing second. I sat in my car for what seemed like hours, the engine off, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. I couldn't bring myself to drive home just yet, not when everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, had been shaken to its core. There had to be more to this. There had to be a reason why Victoria was so obsessed with erasing me. I had always felt it deep down, that sense that something wasn't right. But now I was ready to face the truth, no matter how ugly it turned out to be. The flickering streetlights cast strange shadows over the dashboard, and I found myself reaching for my phone, my fingers trembling just slightly as I opened the email app. There it was, the email I had been waiting for. My heart pounded as I clicked on the notification. "Your DNA results are ready." My breath caught in my throat. I had sent my samples to 3 different ancestry testing companies, unsure of what I might uncover, but knowing it would reveal something that Victoria had been trying so desperately to hide. Something I was certain she knew. Something that could unravel everything. Before I share what happened next, the moment that turned everything upside down and left me with more questions than answers, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. I opened the results page, holding my breath. The colorful chart of my genetic heritage stared back at me, but it was the names in the DNA matches section that held my attention. Thomas Porter, my father. No match. My heart dropped, the weight of that single line of text heavier than I had imagined. The man I had known my whole life, my father, wasn't my biological father. The truth hit me like a cold wave, and for a moment, I sat in silence, letting the gravity of it settle in. But that wasn't all. No, there was more. There was something far bigger buried beneath the surface of this seemingly simple revelation. I scrolled further down, my eyes scanning the names and relationships. And then there it was, James Porter. 25% DNA shared. Uncle. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. James. My father's younger brother. The one who had disappeared after my mother's death. The one Victoria had claimed had moved to Australia, cutting ties with the family. The man who had been erased from every family history and conversation. He was my biological father. I leaned back in the car seat, my head spinning. Suddenly, everything made sense. Victoria's hatred for me, the way she always treated me as an outsider, the endless attempts to erase me from family photos, to push me out of their world. It wasn't about me being a stepdaughter. It was about her trying to bury a secret so deeply that even I couldn't find it. She hadn't just been trying to push out an unwanted stepchild. She had been trying to hide a scandal that could tear apart the perfect family image she'd so carefully crafted. And then it hit me, the most terrifying realization of all. Victoria had known. She had always known. She had known that my true father wasn't Thomas, and she had spent the last 20 years doing everything in her power to make sure no one found out. To erase me, to make me disappear. But it was too late now. The truth was out there, and I would make sure the world knew it. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove aimlessly through the dark streets, my mind racing with thoughts I could barely contain. How had this been kept from me for so long? How had my father been complicit in all of this? Why had James disappeared? The answers felt so close, yet so out of reach. The truth was closer than I realized. And soon it would be impossible to ignore. But for now, I needed to prepare. The next step wasn't just about me. It was about them, my family, my future, the truth that had been hidden for far too long. And when the time came, when I had everything I needed, I would finally have the power to rewrite my story. And I wouldn't be erased this time. Not again. The following weeks were a blur of tension and silence. I couldn't stop thinking about the discovery, the truth about James. Every moment with Victoria felt like I was walking through a minefield. Each word she spoke a potential trigger. She had no idea that I knew. She had no idea that I was no longer the naive girl she could push around without consequence. The mask she wore so carefully, the poised, perfect wife, was cracking, and I could see it. Every time she spoke to me, her words were laced with a thinly veiled malice, as if daring me to confront her. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. I had to be smart. I had to wait for the right moment. That moment came on a quiet Sunday afternoon, a day that felt too peaceful for what was about to unfold. The family had gathered for dinner at the estate, and as usual, Victoria was playing the role of the perfect hostess. She flitted around the room, greeting everyone with a smile that could freeze you in your tracks. But I saw right through it now. I could feel the chill in the air whenever she turned her gaze in my direction. William was there, of course, standing by her side, silently observing the spectacle, never once stepping out of line. The man who had once been my father, the one who had promised to protect me, was now nothing more than a ghost in my life. And then there were Sophia and Lily, my stepsisters, pretending to be so polite, so perfect, while their mother manipulated everything around them. They were part of it too, whether they realized it or not. The room was buzzing with the usual chatter, but I couldn't focus on any of it. My mind was elsewhere, on Victoria, on the truth that I had yet to expose. The weight of it pressed down on me like a storm waiting to break. And finally, it did. "Elena, could you come over here for a moment?" Victoria's voice cut through the noise, sharp and insistent. I turned, my gaze locking with hers, and I could see the unease beneath the polished exterior. She was trying to act casual, but the tension in her posture told me everything I needed to know. This was it. I walked over slowly, taking my time. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room following me, but I didn't care. This wasn't about them. This was about Victoria, and the lie she had built her life on. The lie that had kept me hidden in the shadows. "Yes, Victoria?" I said, my voice steady, calm. I had practiced this moment in my head 1,000 times, but now that it was happening, it felt surreal. She smiled, that fake, perfect smile, her lips curving in the way that only someone who had perfected the art of deception could. "I just wanted to ask how you've been feeling lately, with everything that's happened." I could hear the undercurrent in her words, the subtle implication that I was unstable, that I was the problem. The cracks were showing. It was a game she had been playing for years, making me the villain in my own story. But not anymore. "I'm fine," I said. the words coming out more forcefully than I intended. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I wasn't going to let her see it. Not yet. She tilted her head, her smile widening just a little, too wide to be genuine. You sure about that? Because it's been quite a few years since… Well, you know. Her voice dropped just a touch, the meaning clear even without the words. Since you stopped being part of this family. I could feel the blood rushing to my face, but I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of knowing she had rattled me. Instead, I let a small smile tug at the corners of my mouth. It was a smile that held nothing but resolve, the calm before the storm. Actually, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, Victoria, I said, each word carefully measured, but with enough bite to make her flinch. And I've come to realize that I wasn't part of this family, not because of anything I did, but because of what you've done. What you've been hiding from all of us. Her smile faltered for a split second, just enough for me to see the crack in her armor. And that was all I needed. What are you talking about? She snapped, the first hint of panic slipping into her voice. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest as I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. The evidence was right there, in front of me, the DNA results, the irrefutable truth. I held the phone out, letting her see the names on the screen. The names that changed everything. I'm talking about the truth, Victoria, I said, my voice low and steady. The truth about who I really am. The truth about James. The room seemed to freeze for a moment. Everyone else was silent, waiting, watching. I didn't need to look around to know that all eyes were on us. The family, the guests. Everyone was suddenly very aware that this was not just a family drama. This was something bigger. Something that could shatter the perfect image Victoria had spent years cultivating. Victoria's face went pale, her eyes darting to the phone and then back to me. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I took another step forward, watching as she struggled to find her footing. You thought you could erase me. You thought you could make everyone forget the truth. But the truth has a way of coming out. And now you have to face it. Her composure, so carefully constructed over the years, was crumbling before my eyes. Her shoulders stiffened, and I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to come up with a way to spin this, to make it disappear. But there was no escape this time. This isn't about me, Victoria, I continued, my voice growing colder. This is about you. Your lies, your manipulation, and everything you've done to keep this family under your control. For a moment, the room was utterly still, the silence heavy with the weight of the truth that had just been laid bare. And then, a voice broke through. Is this true? William's voice, soft but filled with something I hadn't heard from him in years. Concern, guilt, maybe even fear. His gaze met mine, and for the first time in a long while he wasn't hiding behind a mask. But it didn't matter. Victoria was already recovering, already spinning her web of excuses. This is absurd, she said, her voice rising in pitch, trying to regain control. You don't know what you're talking about. This is all lies, fabricated. No, I interrupted, the word sharp and final. The lies are yours, Victoria. And with that, the game was over. There was no more pretending. There was no more hiding behind her perfect facade. Victoria had been exposed. The days that followed felt like an endless whirlwind, the kind of storm that rages fiercely before leaving nothing but quiet chaos in its wake. The confrontation at the dinner party had left a crack in the family's polished exterior. And now, it was as if the floodgates had opened. I could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on me. Every step I took pulling me deeper into a family history I had never truly known. One that had been carefully hidden from me for years. Victoria had tried to spin her lies, tried to convince everyone that I was merely a troubled child seeking attention. But the truth was undeniable now. The DNA results were only the beginning. What I had uncovered was much more than a mere biological link to James. It was the unraveling of a carefully constructed web of lies, deceit, and manipulation that went far deeper than I could have ever imagined. As the days passed, I found myself poring through old family records, documents, and photographs. Everything I could get my hands on. It was like piecing together a jigsaw puzzle, except every piece I found only deepened the mystery. I discovered emails, old bank statements, and obscure references to accounts I had never known existed. It was like Victoria had built her empire on secrets, and every one of them was coming to light. The truth was much darker than I had thought. The more I dug, the more I realized how much Victoria had been willing to sacrifice to keep her perfect image intact. It was a Sunday morning when I came across the first real lead. An old letter tucked away in the back of a drawer in my father's study. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, dated just weeks before my mother's death. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the paper, my heart racing with anticipation. The letter was addressed to Thomas Porter, my father, and the contents were chilling. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a financial settlement agreement. But what struck me most was the signature at the bottom, Victoria's. It was clear now that she had been involved in everything from the very beginning. She had been plotting, scheming, even before my mother's death. My mother, the woman who had once been the beating heart of this family, had never stood a chance against Victoria's cold ambition. My mind raced as I thought back to everything I had learned, everything I had seen. Victoria's influence over my father, her manipulation of him. It was all part of a carefully orchestrated plan. But it wasn't just about my mother's death. No, it was bigger than that. It was about control, power, and the family fortune. Victoria had been positioning herself for years, making sure that no one would challenge her reign over the Porter estate. But now, the truth was slipping through her fingers, and it was only a matter of time before everything she had worked for would come crumbling down. I couldn't keep this to myself. I had to confront William, but I knew he was going to be defensive, frightened, maybe even angry. He had spent decades turning a blind eye to Victoria's actions, and I had no idea how he would react now that the truth was finally out in the open. That night, I decided it was time. I asked William to meet me in the study, the room where so many of our family's secrets had been kept hidden. As he sat across from me, his eyes tired and hesitant, I placed the letter in front of him. The silence between us stretched on for what felt like an eternity, the weight of the truth hanging in the air like a thick fog. "You need to see this," I said quietly, my voice steady, but with an edge of urgency. "This was from Victoria. I don't know how much you knew, but this is where it all started." His eyes flickered to the letter, then back to me, and I saw the flicker of recognition. But it wasn't enough. "Not yet. William, I know you've been keeping secrets. Victoria has been keeping secrets. But it's time we face them. I'm not asking anymore. I'm telling you." My voice was firm, but it cracked slightly, the years of anger and hurt finally finding their way out. He swallowed hard, the words stuck in his throat. "I didn't know everything, Elena. Not about this. I swear I didn't." His voice was strained, filled with a regret that I had never seen before. I could see the cracks in his armor, the guilt that had eaten away at him for years. But I wasn't looking for excuses anymore. I wasn't looking for a father who had failed me. I was looking for the truth, and I was going to make sure it was exposed, no matter how painful it was. "There's more, William," I continued, my eyes never leaving his. "Victoria hasn't just been controlling you. She's been controlling the money. She's been bleeding the family fortune dry, moving everything into her name and her daughter's names. She's been playing you, playing all of us, like pawns in her game." He flinched, as if the words struck him harder than anything I had ever said. I never knew she was capable of this. But it didn't matter what he knew or didn't know anymore. The damage had already been done. The lies, the deceit, the years of manipulation, they couldn't be undone. The family had already been broken, and the only thing left to do now was to confront it head-on. "I know you didn't know, William, but it's time to face the truth. This family, your family, has been built on lies, and we can't move forward until we tear them down." The silence that followed was thick with tension, each of us trapped in our own thoughts. I could feel the weight of the years pressing down on me, the years of pretending everything was fine, the years of being pushed aside, of being erased from the family I thought I knew. But now it was all coming to light, and I wasn't going to let Victoria take anything else from me. "We have to stop her," I said finally, my voice firm. "We have to expose everything. We can't let her get away with it." William looked at me, his expression unreadable. But for the first time in years, I saw something shift in his eyes. A glimmer of resolve. He wasn't the same man who had stood by silently all those years. And maybe, just maybe, he was finally ready to face the truth with me. The pieces were falling into place. And this was only the beginning. The final confrontation had been building for weeks, but nothing could prepare me for the moment when it actually happened. I had done everything I could to gather the truth, to piece together the puzzle of lies and deceit that had held my family captive for so long. Now it was time to bring everything into the light, to expose Victoria for who she truly was, and to reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. It was a cold Thursday morning when the storm finally broke. The entire family had gathered at William's estate for what was supposed to be a quiet breakfast, a final attempt at pretending everything was fine. But nothing was fine anymore. Victoria could see the change in the air, the shift in the way I held myself, the way William was no longer looking at her the same way. She had to know that the walls were closing in, but she didn't yet realize how much I had uncovered, how much I was ready to expose. I arrived early, my heart pounding in my chest, but my resolve as firm as steel. I had spent the last few days reviewing everything: documents, emails, financial records. Every piece of evidence was laid out before me like a carefully crafted case, each one tying Victoria to the web of lies she had spun around my family. I could hear her laughter in the next room, fake and brittle, as she tried to maintain her composure. But I knew she could feel it too, the impending sense of doom. She could feel the walls closing in on her perfect world. William was already seated at the dining table when I walked in. His face was drawn, tired, but there was something different about him now. Something in his eyes: recognition, guilt, maybe even a flicker of defiance. He wasn't the man who had allowed himself to be manipulated for all those years. He had seen the truth, and he was ready to face it. I took a deep breath, my heart beating faster as I walked toward the table. Victoria looked up, a tight smile spreading across her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Elena, how nice of you to join us," she said, her voice too sweet, too practiced. I didn't respond. I just sat down, my hands folding in front of me, ready. The silence stretched between us like a live wire, waiting to snap. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady, but with the unmistakable weight of everything I had learned. "Victoria, we need to talk." Her smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Talk? About what?" she asked, feigning innocence. But I could see the flicker of worry in her eyes. She knew. She knew I wasn't here for casual conversation. "The truth," I said, my voice dropping lower, the words thick with the weight of everything I had uncovered. "About you. About what you've been hiding from all of us." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, Victoria laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that cut through the tension. "Elena, you've really let this whole thing get to your head. This obsession with the truth, it's sad. Really. You need to let go of these fantasies. You're imagining things." "I'm not imagining anything," I said, the calm in my voice masking the storm inside me. "I've seen the documents, the emails, the bank records. I know exactly what you've been doing, Victoria. You've been manipulating my father, controlling the money, keeping us all in the dark. And I'm done being your pawn." Her eyes narrowed, the last remnants of her composure slipping away. "Pawn?" she repeated, her voice low with venom. "You think you can just walk in here and accuse me of—" "I'm not accusing you, Victoria. I'm telling you the truth." My voice was unwavering now, the words like a blade cutting through the lies she had so carefully built. "You've been using my father and his family for years. Stealing, manipulating, erasing me from the picture so you could have everything for yourself. You thought you could control me, control everything. But you were wrong." I could feel the tension in the room tightening, William watching silently, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He knew I was right. He knew I was telling the truth. Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You don't know what you're talking about, she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. You don't know what it's like to be in my position. I've built everything from the ground up. Everything I've done, I did for this family. For us. Her eyes flickered to William, a desperate plea in them, but he didn't look back. Everything, I said, standing up now, my heart racing. You've destroyed everything, Victoria. You've torn apart this family piece by piece, and I'm not going to let you get away with it anymore. The room fell silent, the weight of my words settling in. For the first time in years, Victoria didn't know how to respond. She was cornered, exposed, and for all her manipulation, she couldn't spin her way out of this one. You've lied to everyone, Victoria, I continued, taking a step toward her, my voice strong. You've erased me from the family photos, erased me from the inheritance, from my own life. You've been lying, stealing, hiding everything. But it ends today. This family deserves the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. Victoria took a step back, her face paling, the mask of control slipping from her features. You're not going to win this, Elena, she spat, her voice cold and cruel. I've spent 20 years making this family what it is. You think you can just come in and destroy everything? I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I'm not destroying anything, Victoria. You did that all on your own. I'm just exposing it. The truth always comes out, no matter how hard you try to hide it. William stood up then, his voice quiet but filled with finality. She's right. I was wrong, Victoria. I should have seen it sooner. But now I see it, and I won't turn a blind eye anymore. The words hit like a thunderclap. Victoria recoiled, as if the very truth I had laid before her had physically struck her. Her face twisted in a mix of disbelief and fury. She was losing. Everything she had built, everything she had fought for was slipping away. You can't do this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I already have, I said, my gaze unwavering. And I'm not stopping now. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. The truth was finally out, and there was nothing Victoria could do to take it back. And as the pieces of her empire crumbled around her, I knew one thing for certain. The real battle had just begun. The dust had barely settled when Victoria was escorted out of the estate, her face pale, her posture rigid, as if she were being led to some kind of execution. She had never been one to accept defeat gracefully, but there was no room for excuses anymore. The truth had shattered her carefully crafted world, and she had nothing left to cling to. The silence in the room felt heavy, but it wasn't oppressive. It was the kind of silence that follows a storm, the air thick with the weight of things finally coming to light. I stood there, staring after her retreating figure, my heart still pounding, but not from fear or anger. No, this time it was from something else, something that felt almost like liberation. For the first time in years, I could breathe. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly seen, truly heard. William was standing behind me, his hands still clenched at his sides. But there was something different in his expression now. He wasn't just the man who had failed to protect me all those years. He was the man who had finally woken up to the truth. Slowly, he approached me, his footsteps soft on the marble floor. Elena, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to begin. I should have done this a long time ago. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't need to. The truth was there between us now, unspoken but understood. I turned to face him, my gaze steady. You don't have to say anything, William. It's too late for apologies. I'm not asking for that. I just need you to be better. For yourself. For me. His eyes flickered with guilt, but there was something else there now, something like resolve. He nodded slowly, the weight of the years of silence and regret pressing down on his shoulders. I will. I'll try. I'll make this right. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the truth was, the road to redemption wasn't a simple one. It was going to take time. The damage had been done, and even if it could be repaired, it wouldn't happen overnight. But it didn't matter. What mattered now was that we had a chance to rebuild, a chance to start over. It was strange, in a way. I had spent so much of my life fighting to be seen, to be accepted, to be loved by a family that had pushed me away. And now, here I was, standing in the remains of the life Victoria had built, ready to build something entirely new, something better. My thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. I turned to see Sophia standing in the doorway, her face a mix of uncertainty and something softer. "Elena," she said hesitantly. "Can we talk?" I nodded, motioning for her to come in. She stepped into the room, her eyes on the floor, clearly unsure of how to approach me after everything that had happened. The last time I had seen her, she had been loyal to Victoria, believing the lies, playing her part in the charade. But now the truth was out, and everything had changed. "I know I didn't stand up for you before," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. I was just scared. Scared of losing what we had. But I see it now. I see everything. I didn't speak right away. What was there to say? The betrayal had hurt, yes, but in some strange way I could understand it. Sophia had been raised by Victoria. She had been taught to see me as the problem, as the one who didn't belong. But that wasn't her fault. It was Victoria's. "You don't have to apologize," I said finally, my voice soft. "I understand. But things have changed, Sophia. We can't go back to how it was. But we can move forward together. If you want that." She nodded slowly, her eyes brimming with tears. "I do. I want to try." And in that moment, I realized that Sophia wasn't the enemy. She had been a victim of Victoria's lies, just like I had. In the end, we were both trying to find our place in a family that had never really been ours. But now we had the chance to create something different. A new kind of family, one built on truth, not secrets. As Sophia and I stood there, in that quiet, broken room, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Maybe this family could be repaired. Maybe we could rebuild piece by piece with the truth as the foundation. And maybe, just maybe, I could finally have the life I had always wanted. One where I wasn't hidden. One where I didn't have to fight for every scrap of affection. One where I could simply be myself. The days ahead wouldn't be easy. There was so much to rebuild, so much to heal. But for the first time, I wasn't alone. I had William, Sophia, and even Lily, who, for all her flaws, was beginning to see things for what they truly were. Together, we could face whatever came next. Together, we could create something new. And when I looked at the family portrait on the wall, the one that had been so carefully edited and altered, I realized something important. It didn't matter that I wasn't in the picture before, because now I was part of the story. My story. The story that was finally mine to tell. After Victoria left, things seemed to settle down, at least on the surface. Elena had spent countless hours talking with William and Sophia, and while it hadn't been easy, they had taken the first steps toward rebuilding their relationships. But Elena knew that the road ahead would still be full of challenges. What had happened in the past couldn't simply be healed with words, no matter how sincere or regretful. Day by day, Elena worked on rebuilding trust with William. They were no longer just a father and daughter, but two people trying to start anew, to build a new relationship, moving past the loss and damage of the past. Elena wasn't sure she could ever fully forgive William for letting her suffer all those years, but she also understood that she had to change too. She had to accept the reality that everything couldn't go back to the way it was. One afternoon, while Elena was sitting in William's living room, she heard a soft knock on the door. Sophia stepped in, her face filled with uncertainty and something softer. She wasn't the same proud girl she used to be, but rather someone who was trying to find herself again. "Elena," Sophia said hesitantly, "I know that things can't change overnight, but I want to help. I can't change the past, but I want to do something to make things right." She paused before continuing, "I want to help you and Dad. It might be something small, but I don't want to just stand by." Elena looked into her eyes, unsure how to respond. She had always thought Sophia would side with Victoria, but now she realized that people could change, and they weren't always the enemies they appeared to be. "Thank you," Elena smiled, still a bit skeptical. but she knew this was an opportunity for them both to start fresh. We'll need all the support we can get, and maybe we can learn to work together. But just as things started to settle, new dangers arrived. A sudden legal attack came from Victoria's former business partner, Robert King. He had been involved in shady financial deals with Victoria, and now, with Victoria out of the picture, he was determined not to let Elena and the family have control of the estate so easily. He threatened to expose questionable investments and financial secrets Victoria had left behind, potentially bankrupting the family and causing them to lose everything. "Elena," William said during a tense family meeting, "we can't avoid these attacks. Robert is not someone who gives up easily. And if we don't handle this right, everything could collapse quickly." Elena looked at her father, her feelings not just of frustration but of determination. "William, I won't let this happen. Victoria has torn apart this family enough. I won't stand by and let others take advantage of us." Her words sparked something in William too. He saw now that Elena wasn't just his daughter. She was the one leading the charge in this battle. She wasn't just depending on the family anymore. She was the one fighting to rebuild everything that had been taken. With the help of Sophia, Lily, and a team of experienced lawyers Elena reached out to, they started to secure the family's assets. Elena gathered evidence, contacted former associates of Victoria, and made sure every part of the family fortune was protected. The clouds of the past hadn't completely cleared, but Elena knew she wasn't facing them alone anymore. Day by day, Elena continued to learn how to be a leader, someone others could look to for strength. She also began to realize that while Victoria's actions couldn't be undone, maybe the presence of Elena, in a truly united and honest family, could change her own life. The more she took charge, the more she realized she was building a future where she wasn't fighting for scraps of affection anymore. She was fighting for the life she had always deserved. The road ahead would not be easy. There was much to rebuild, much to heal. But for the first time, Elena wasn't doing it alone. She had William, Sophia, and even Lily, who, despite her flaws, was beginning to see things for what they truly were. Together, they could face whatever came next. Together, they could create something new. And when Elena looked at the family portrait on the wall, the one that had been carefully edited and altered, she realized something important. It didn't matter that she hadn't been in the picture before, because now she was part of the story. Her story. The story that was finally hers to tell. As the weeks went by, Elena felt the weight of the battle she had fought slowly easing. The legal threats from Robert had begun to diminish, thanks to the meticulous work she and her team had put in to fortify the family's position. The old skeletons of Victoria's financial games were being buried under the weight of undeniable facts, and the pieces of the Porter estate were being carefully, methodically, and most importantly, honestly reorganized. Yet, while the storm seemed to be subsiding on the outside, Elena knew that her work was far from finished. There was a new quiet in the house, one that wasn't filled with tension, but with a strange, tentative hope. The family dinners, which had once been fraught with awkward silences and unspoken judgments, were now filled with genuine conversations. William was really trying to rebuild his relationship with Elena, though it wasn't easy, and there were moments when old habits and resentments crept in. But Elena had learned something valuable through it all. Healing didn't happen all at once. It happened piece by piece, day by day, and each moment of progress was worth cherishing. One evening, as Elena sat on the balcony watching the sunset, Sophia joined her, a soft presence at her side. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was companionable. "Elena," Sophia began, her voice quieter than usual, "I don't think I've ever really said this, but I want to thank you. I know I haven't always been there for you, but I want you to know that I see you now. I see who you are and I see what you've done. I was blind before." Elena didn't immediately reply. She let the words hang in the air, feeling the sincerity in them, knowing how much Sophia had changed. It had taken time, and it would take more, but for the first time, Elena felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the past alone. "Thank you," Elena said softly, her eyes meeting Sophia's. "But I wasn't the only one who needed to change. I understand now that we were all trapped in our own version of this family." Victoria made us all believe we had no choice. But now, we do. Sophia nodded, her eyes filled with both guilt and relief. We do? She echoed, a faint smile tugging at her lips. As the days turned into weeks, Elena began to think about her own future outside of all the turmoil. She had spent so many years fighting to survive in a family that saw her as an outsider, and now she could finally start asking herself what she wanted. Not just in terms of family, but in her career, her own personal growth. She had inherited her mother's spirit, and for so long, she had been afraid to acknowledge it. But now she was free to build a life on her own terms. One afternoon, after a long meeting with their new financial advisor, Elena sat down with William. The air between them had changed, the tension from before replaced with something far more fragile but hopeful. William, she began, I've been thinking. I've spent so many years working in the shadow of this family, of Victoria's lies. I've been living in fear, in the wake of her control. But now I want to do something more. I want to make my own mark. I want to build something that's mine, that I can be proud of. William looked at her with a mixture of pride and regret. I never realized just how much she held you back, Elena. I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. I know, she replied, her voice gentle but firm. And I forgive you, but this is my time now. I want to step out on my own, away from all of this. I want to build something for myself. And I'm not just talking about business or money. I'm talking about my own life, my own story. William nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. I think your mother would have been proud of you, Elena. I know I am. A sense of relief washed over her. For the first time, she realized that the weight of her family's expectations, whether from her father or Victoria, no longer held any power over her. She was free to chart her own course, to decide what success meant for her, and to finally feel like she belonged to herself. But that didn't mean she had to do it alone. Slowly, the family was coming back together. Each person, broken in their own way, was finding their way toward healing. The house was still the same, but it no longer felt like the place of betrayal and manipulation. It had the potential to be a home once again. One evening, as the three of them, William, Sophia, and Elena, sat down for a meal together, there was an ease to the conversation, a sense that they were no longer just trying to survive one another. They were, perhaps for the first time, genuinely seeing each other. And for Elena, that was enough. Looking around the table, she realized that while she hadn't gotten everything she had imagined when she was younger, what she had now was more meaningful. She had her family back, not in the way it was before, but in a new form, a form that was honest, real, and full of promise. And as she looked at her family, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Not as the broken people they once were, but as a family that had been given the chance to rebuild, to start fresh. For the first time, Elena felt truly at home. Not because everything was perfect, but because she had found her place in the world. And in that moment, she knew that the future held endless possibilities, waiting for her to take the next step. With her heart steady and her mind clear, she looked ahead, ready for whatever came next. It was time for her to live her truth and write her own story. And this time, she would be the one to control the pen. As Elena sat at the window, looking out over the sprawling estate, a sense of peace washed over her. It was still hard to believe how much had changed in such a short period of time. The battles with Victoria, the legal chaos, and the years of isolation. All of it felt like it was from another lifetime. But now, she was finally free to live the life she had always dreamed of. The storm had passed, and what remained was a new dawn. One thing she had learned through it all was that healing didn't happen overnight. It wasn't an instant fix, but something that came gradually. Small steps, quiet conversations, and moments of understanding. The family wasn't perfect. There would still be moments of tension, of hurt, but the difference now was that they were facing those moments with honesty, with a willingness to work through the pain together. Sophia had grown more confident in her role within the family. The realization that Elena wasn't her enemy, but someone who had been hurt by the same person, had been a turning point for both of them. They were learning how to build trust, to stand side by side instead of as adversaries. While it wasn't easy, They were slowly finding common ground, forging a bond that was fragile but real. William, too, had shown a vulnerability that Elena hadn't seen before. It wasn't about grand gestures or long apologies, but the quiet moments, the way he now listened when she spoke, the way he no longer tried to hide behind excuses. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And for Elena, that was enough. One evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, something that had once felt so foreign and uncomfortable, they found themselves laughing. Sophia had made a joke about an embarrassing moment from their childhood, and William joined in, teasing her about how much she'd changed. For the first time in years, the atmosphere felt light. It was the kind of dinner Elena had always imagined. A table full of love, laughter, and connection. But even as she savored the moment, Elena knew that the Real challenge was just beginning. Her future was still uncertain, still uncharted. She had taken the first step in reclaiming her own identity, but now it was time to make that identity her own. She had spent so many years living in the shadows, but now she was stepping into the light, ready to build a future that was truly hers. The next morning, after a quiet breakfast, Elena found herself sitting at her desk, surrounded by papers and plans. The weight of what she had to do felt heavy, but she didn't hesitate. She had been offered a chance to expand the family business, to lead a new venture that would allow her to finally make her mark in the world. It was a huge responsibility, but it felt right. The foundation Victoria had built was shaky, but it was still there, and Elena saw potential in what could be rebuilt. She had spent enough time in the background, watching others take charge, wondering if she would ever get the chance to be her own person. But now she had that chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. She knew there would be challenges, doubts, obstacles, and pushback from those who had once seen her as nothing more than an outsider. But Elena was ready. For the first time in her life, she had the courage to take control of her destiny. As the days turned into weeks, Elena found herself surrounded by a team of talented people who believed in her vision. The work was challenging, but it was exactly what she needed. She was no longer just a daughter trying to fit into a family that didn't understand her. She was a leader, forging her own path, making decisions that would shape not just her future, but the future of the Porter legacy. But even as she immersed herself in the business, Elena never lost sight of the family she had worked so hard to rebuild. The bond between her and William, Sophia, and Lily grew stronger with each passing day. They weren't perfect, but they were learning how to be there for each other in ways they never had before. And that, in itself, was a victory. One night, as Elena sat alone in her office, looking over the plans for the next phase of the business, she couldn't help but smile. The path ahead was still uncertain, and she knew there would be more challenges. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready. Ready to face the future with open arms. Ready to embrace the changes that lay ahead. She had come so far, and yet, it felt like this was only the beginning. As the sun set outside her window, casting a golden glow over the city, Elena felt a sense of peace settle in her heart. She had fought for her place in this world, and now she was going to live it fully. No more hiding, no more waiting for permission. She was in control of her own story now, and it was a story that was just beginning to unfold. And for the first time in her life, Elena knew that whatever happened next, she would be ready to face it, with courage, with strength, and with the knowledge that she had already won the most important battle of all. The battle to truly be herself. The days turned into months, and Elena found herself growing more comfortable in her new role. She had always known she was capable, but it wasn't until she stepped into leadership that she truly understood the weight of what it meant to build something from the ground up. The family business, once an empire built on secrets and manipulation, was beginning to transform under her guidance into something authentic, something that reflected her values of honesty, transparency, and integrity. Each day was filled with hard decisions, late nights at the office, and the occasional moment of doubt. There were people who questioned her methods, who doubted her ability to lead the company that Victoria had so carefully cultivated. But with each challenge, Elena grew more determined. She was no longer the outsider, the person who had to fight for her place. Now, she was the one leading, and she was going to make sure that everything Victoria had built was not just preserved, but elevated. At home, Elena and William continued to rebuild their relationship. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, but now there was a foundation of trust between them that hadn't existed before. William no longer treated her like a child who needed to be protected, and Elena no longer resented him for his past mistakes. They were learning to communicate, to be honest with each other, and most importantly, to support each other in a way they never had before. Sophia, too, had found her place. She was no longer the girl who blindly followed Victoria's rules. Instead, she was carving her own path, one that involved taking responsibility for the harm she had caused and actively trying to make amends. While the bond between her and Elena was still fragile, it was growing stronger. There were moments of laughter, moments of shared understanding, and even moments of vulnerability. They were learning how to be sisters, and it felt real this time, not forced, not out of obligation, but out of a shared commitment to rebuilding what had been broken. But even as things began to settle, Elena knew that there were still battles to be fought. The business world was ruthless, and there would always be challenges ahead. Robert King hadn't given up. He continued to lurk in the background, trying to undermine Elena's efforts, making veiled threats and pushing back at every turn. But Elena wasn't intimidated. She had fought for her family, for her place in this world, and now she would fight for the future she was building. One day, Elena received a call from her lawyer. It was a call she had been expecting, but that didn't make it any easier to hear. Robert had filed another lawsuit, this time aiming to seize control of the company, claiming that Elena had no legal right to manage the estate after Victoria's departure. It was the final attempt to destabilize everything she had worked so hard to rebuild. As she hung up the phone, Elena felt a familiar rush of determination. She wasn't going to let Robert win. This wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about everything she had fought for: her family, her identity, her future. She wouldn't let anyone take that away from her. That evening, Elena sat down with William and Sophia at the dinner table, the weight of the news heavy in the air. It had been a long time since they'd had a conversation like this, honest, open, and full of shared resolve. "We're not backing down," Elena said, her voice firm. "This company belongs to us, to all of us, and I'm not going to let Robert destroy it." William nodded, his face grim. "You fought so hard, Elena. We'll stand by you." Sophia looked at her sister, her eyes filled with admiration and determination. "Whatever it takes, I'm with you. We'll do this together." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision settling over them. Elena knew that the battle ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be legal fights, financial setbacks, and endless pressure from Robert and his allies. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. She had her family behind her, and together they could overcome anything. And so they fought. For months, the legal battles raged on, but Elena and her team held their ground. They gathered evidence, made strategic moves, and, most importantly, stayed united. The pressure was immense, but the strength of their resolve only grew. With every victory, no matter how small, Elena felt more confident in her ability to lead, to guide her family and the business into a new era. Finally, the day came when the legal battle was over. Robert's case had fallen apart, and Elena emerged victorious. The Porter estate was safe, and the business was secure. But the victory didn't feel like an end. It felt like the beginning of something even bigger. Elena had proven herself, not just to the world, but to herself. She had fought for what was hers, and now she could look ahead with the knowledge that nothing would stop her from creating the future she deserved. As Elena stood on the balcony of the estate, watching the sunset once again, she reflected on everything she had been through. The loss, the betrayal, the uncertainty. All of it had shaped her, but none of it defined her. She had found her place in the world, not because of the family she had been born into, but because of the strength she had discovered within herself. The story of the Porter family was still being written, but it was no longer a tale of manipulation and power struggles. It was a story of resilience, of rebuilding, and of forging a new legacy, one that Elena would lead, with her family by her side. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elena knew that whatever came next, she was ready. She had already overcome the hardest battle of all, the battle to find herself. Now, she was ready to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that the greatest triumph was not just in what she had achieved, but in who she had become. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Elena found herself reflecting on how far she had come. She had fought for her family, for the legacy of the Porter name, and most importantly, for herself. Through every challenge, every setback, and every moment of doubt, she had emerged stronger. The future, once clouded with uncertainty, now gleamed with promise. And though her journey had been long and arduous, she knew that the story didn't end here. The battle for the Porter legacy was just the beginning. With her family by her side and a newfound sense of purpose, Elena was ready to take on whatever came next, whether in business, in life, or in her quest to build something lasting. As she looked out over the horizon from the estate, her heart swelled with hope. For the first time in her life, she knew that she was not defined by her past or by the family that had tried to erase her. She was building her own future now, one that would be hers to shape, free from the shadows of the past. And the best part? The adventure was just beginning. Thank you for following Elena's journey and the Porter family's journey. The road to redemption, transformation, and new beginnings is never easy, but it's always worth it. If you've enjoyed this story, if Elena's struggle has inspired you or reminded you of your own strength, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us for more incredible stories like this one. Don't forget to like and share if you believe that we all have the power to rewrite our stories. Wherever you are, whatever you're facing, remember, no matter how hard the journey gets, you have the strength to keep going. And together, we'll keep moving forward. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and always keep fighting for the future you deserve.